The first, we kind of wanted to have three big themes for this first event. One is kind of this policy public service focus. And so all of these women have different roles, either in elected public service or as leaders of policy organizations and nonprofit. And so we want to hear a little bit from each of them. What we're going to do is hear a little from each of our panelists about what they do and their inspirations, and then we're going to open it up for audience questions. So please do think of those questions so that we can ask them and engage here at the end of the panel. So with that, I want to introduce everyone. First up here, we've got Jennifer Schellpeper, and she works at the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources. And Marty Link is at the Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality. I should have gotten full titles on my list, but like I said, read it online. These are amazing women. And then Alisha Bartling works at the Santee Sioux Nation with their Office of Environment, correct? Thank you. And Chelsea Johnson is at Nebraska Conservation Voters. And Karen Amon is with the Lower Platte South Natural Resource District, as well as on the Nebraska Natural Resources Commission, as you heard in the introduction. So welcome, ladies, and let's hear a little bit about your perspectives on this.
Thank you, Crystal. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. It's so great to see all these faces. I know as I heard about this gathering, I was like, how many folks are going to show up for this? Who's going to be here? And when I came and I said, so how many folks registered? Oh, I think we have 115. I was like, wow, that's great. So it's wonderful to see everybody here today. Thanks for that great introduction. As she mentioned, I work for the Department of Natural Resources. I'm the Water Planning Division Manager, and so I have 17 staff who work in my division. And we have the privilege of working across the state of Nebraska with all of our local natural resources districts on integrated water management planning. And what that means is we look at the hydrologically connected supplies of groundwater and surface water across the state in each of those natural resources districts, as well as in groups of the natural resources districts where we do basin-wide planning. And we ask ourselves, what is the balance of the water supply and the water use in each of those areas when we go in to develop those plans? And across the state of Nebraska, there's a great variation in that. In the eastern side of the state, we find we've got quite a lot of water supply available to meet all of the demands for water. That makes the planning a little bit easier. But as you move across the state to the west and you cross that 100th meridian, that changes quite a bit. And so the water supply is generally not enough to meet all of the demands that we see in the western half of the state. And so that's where we have our conflicts. That's where we have folks who are getting a little concerned, a little worried, a little more vociferous when you see them in meetings. And so it takes a skill set to deal with that. And luckily for us, one of the tools that we have in our state statute to deal with that is a stakeholder process, where we actually go out and actively engage with those folks. We pull them into the planning process. Those are the local farmers, producers, the people who are on the Chamber of Commerce, folks who are in education, just the everyday Joe out there who has some interest in the water use, and specifically those water users are there. And in those conflict areas, those processes can last 3 to 5 years. So it's an ongoing process. It lasts quite a while. There's a lot of education involved in that because you have folks who know nothing about how water is hydrologically connected, maybe don't even believe that it's hydrologically connected. So those are difficult conversations. And then you're asking them, how can you use less water? If we are short, if there isn't enough to meet all the demand, who is not going to have enough water? And so that takes leadership skills, it takes facilitation and mediation skills, it takes a great deal of patience. In the 20 years that I've been there, you have the same conversation with the same person again and again and again and again. But you know, with each time, I do see it moves a little bit further forward. You know, you go through the process, you talk to these people, you might take a few steps back, but then you go forward again. And that's what I've seen as I've been there. You have to adapt to that change, you have to adapt to the changing laws, there's always circumstances changing around us, and so you need the skills to adapt to all of that. So what motivates and inspires me, as I've worked in this difficult field throughout my time, I came to a crossroads when I was in college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had 2 years of an engineering degree behind me, so the hard science, the hard math, I'd been doing all that. But the classes just didn't resonate, and I really had an interest in environmental protection, which the engineers didn't seem to care about much at all, at least at that time, in the classes that I was in. So I went and I talked to my advisor, and I said, hey, I think I want to change to environmental studies. That just sounds like it really aligns a lot better with what I want to do. And the advice I got, very kindly, was, well, maybe that's not quite what you should do. You have all of this hard science, and so think about water science. That might be a better avenue for you, where you could bring together your science, your math, with your interest in the environment. Put those two things together. I wasn't sold. I left that day and I thought, well, I'll think about it, but I'm not really sure. It still doesn't feel quite right. And as it happened, I was taking a meditation class also at the same time at Southeast Community College. And so I meditated, and that night I had a memory come to me from childhood. And it was on the farm. I was a little kid. It was a warm summer day, but there was rain. And we had had some rain for a while, so the farm ground was pretty wet, and I loved to play outside in the rain. And so I'd start at the bottom, and we had a good hill on the farm. So I'd start where all the water was pooling, and there was so much of it running downhill, and I'd work my way up, following the flow of that water up the hill, seeing where it would dam, where it would break through, just the flow of the water, how much power it had. And when I got to the top of the hill, what I found fascinating was you didn't see that. The flow was very different. You just had the overland runoff going up there until it formed the rivulets and it formed into the streams and became more powerful. And I thought, wow, how does that happen? How does that work? And when I had that memory, at that time at the meditation, I thought, oh, water science. That must be what I need to do. So I had no idea where that would take me, but it's been a touchstone for me ever since. I can always go back to that very vivid memory of what's important to me and what inspires me to do the work I do. Even when it becomes more difficult, it's a personal compass that I can check in with. And I can say, is this right for me? Is this the right decision to make? Some of those things with the farmers who are out there and we're telling them, hey, you may have to use less water. Those are tough decisions for those folks. It's hard for me to go into those moments and have to tell them those things. But I can go back to that, and I know that what's important to me is that water resource, is how it affects the farm and the land, and how we can make economic prosperity for all of those people moving forward. So as I look to the future of water management, with the changing weather patterns that we see, the cycles of flood and drought that we see, conflict in water management is only going to increase. And so our passion, our leadership, our patience, the perseverance, all of these skills I've been talking about are critically important if we're going to successfully manage that resource moving forward and be able to make all of our communities thrive. So I strongly encourage all of you who are in water resources or who might be in the crowd considering water resources, find that touchstone, find that personal compass for yourself. Because in these difficult times, you're going to need that to go through and make those tough decisions, engage with those stakeholders on the ground. And with that, I'm pretty sure I'm out of time, so we're overtime.
Well, I'm Marty Link. I'm going to turn on my timer so she doesn't come over and hit me. Now I work for the Department of Environmental Quality, as Crystal told us, everybody, as we started. I have been working there for 30 years, and a little bit more than 30 years, and 25 of that has been a supervisor. So it's been in quite a bit of variability, but mostly groundwater, but I've also done surface water, and our water division folks do loans, and we for wastewater and drinking water. We do permits for the people who discharge into streams. We have livestock operations that need to be permitted. We have a lot of sampling of surface water and groundwater, just a variety of things, including wellhead protection and things that many people have never even heard of. So how did I get interested in water? Well, if a DNR job would have come along 30 years ago, I might have been in DNR too. It was just I wanted to do something in water. The job came up and I took it. Groundwater, surface water, all the things in science that are a lot of fun, I think, and you can't necessarily see how it's working. One of the things that came after I started that kind of has become the thing that inspires me, I was going up to a meeting, I was working at DEQ, going up to a meeting in Valentine and up Highway 83. It was a winter meeting,
And the sun was setting, was getting very low in the west, and putting the big shadows over the sandhills. And it just looked like someone had frozen the ocean and dropped it into the middle of the United States. And being a geologist, I know what's underneath there. There's a bunch of groundwater under there. And at the bottom of that 200-foot hill, there's a little bit of water poking its head up, and that's groundwater. It's pretending to be a wetland now, but it really is groundwater. And that kind of stuff, that's really what makes me want to come back to work every day, is remembering the dropped ocean of waves out there in the sandhills. Couple little funny stories maybe, and just wandering about in my mind is really what I'm going to do for my few minutes. Many years ago, and this is kind of someone said, are we going to do, or we're going to bash men, are we? No. This is kind of a gender neutral story that actually happened to me. Probably, 22 or so years ago, I went out with one of my staff, Bruce Hansen, to an NRD meeting, and we were introducing people to the NRD boards, the idea of wellhead protection, which is the protection of drinking water, public drinking water. And so we had a slide set, you know, the big round carousel thing, and I was helping him get it set up before the meeting and put the extension cord in. And I believe it was a pretty big board, maybe 21 or so people, and the chairperson of the board was a woman at that time. And she comes up to me and she says, oh, isn't that nice, Mrs. Hansen? You're able to come out and watch your husband do his job. I go, I'm his boss? And I don't remember what she said, but it was just kind of an interesting situation. One hopes now that people would use more thought when they start a conversation like that or something, but you know, it was just an interesting little story. One of the things I try and tell my folks, and I've got nearly 40 people working in the water quality division that I'm in charge of, is keep involved, ask questions. When you go to the printer, read the stuff that comes out on the printer from the other folks. You actually learn quite a bit of stuff, right? Right. And let's say you're admin person, or maybe you are the admin person, but maybe your admin person who opens the mail is gone that day. Open the mail. You actually learn quite a bit by opening all the mail that's going on there. Or help your admin person sometime, or go down and help the records people with the stuff. You actually learn a lot of things. The big picture things that end up being really important. Be nice. Sometimes you have to be pushy, but you can still be nice when you're pushy. One of the big things is put yourself in other people's place. So I have this bubble theory. So everybody has a personal bubble. Some people who are kind of maybe self-absorbed or something have a very small bubble, and it's maybe not very transparent. They only see what happens to them. They don't see how the world affects them. They don't see how they are affecting the world either. I'd like to try and think that I strive for a bigger bubble. It's more transparent, that I can see what I do might affect somebody else, or what vice versa, what the world is saying. You know, you can kind of bring things in when you know that what you're doing might make a difference, and that's kind of the bubble theory. It's kind of hard to describe, but I mean, like an example of that might be, you know, there's a lot of people who will get right in your face when they're talking to you. And it may be kind of uncomfortable, you know, you think, whoa, what's going on here? And let's think about it. Maybe they are pushy, maybe that's it. But on the other hand, maybe they can't actually hear you. Maybe they have some sort of thing where they can't hear very well, or they want to make their point, and they just get so excited they get right there. And so try and see why other people might be doing that, and see how you have to change your interaction. We all learn differently, right? Coming here is a way of learning things. There are other things. Maybe you learn better by drawing a picture of it, or maybe you learn better by writing a report or reading something. Maybe you just need to go to a book and read something about it. But everybody learns differently, and you, as a good leader, you kind of recognize that, and maybe you have to explain something 14 different ways because you got 14 different people. Or next year you have to do it again. You say it again the same way. That didn't work, so you have to do it a different way, right? So try different things. This is a new, cool way of doing something different, and it's. I told people as I was sitting down, I don't do 5-minute talks. I do 20-minute talks. And if we want to talk about groundwater quality and nitrates, I can do it. We'll do it later, but. This is the 5-minute of how I kind of go about doing things, and that's pretty much it. She didn't have to throw anything at me.
Okay, well, you
two are great to follow.
Your speech is all wrote out.
It's not written on.
Hi, I'm Alisha Bartling. I am the Environmental Director for the Santee Sioux Nation. What that entails is I oversee and work with EPA Region 7 out of Lenexa, Kansas. We are 100% funded through the tribal nation with our EPA programs. So I oversee the water, the land, and the air. So the water, the surface water, groundwater testing, wetlands. We also do the non-point source management with 319 program. We do a 103 program with our air, so we have an air monitoring station that we work with weekly. We also work with the TRP Brownfields 128A, so we do a lot of cleanups within the hills of northeast Nebraska where there are many hidden treasures. So we work a lot with that. I also work with the GAP program, which is a general assistance program, so we do a lot of admin with that, a lot of documentation writing, a lot of project preparation. And until recently, with the bomb cyclone, did I not understand the full effects of the bomb cyclone, until we were hit majorly in March with that, so the emergency management side also of being prepared and having documentation ready for a natural disaster to hit. So we work with a lot with that. We're a small office of 5, so not only do I oversee all of those departments, I also do all of the vouchers, phone answering. We do a lot of field work, so we all help each other out. We're a pretty diverse group. I did not come into the water naturally. I am not a science person. I'm not an environmental person. I was a communications major. So 7 years ago when this position opened up, it was in northeast Nebraska where I called home. So I applied. I was brought in. I was brought into a group of people who love science and math and are in a box. And I'm the one running around on the outside of the box asking why nobody's communicating. So it's been interesting. Coming into the reservation has been a real eye-opening experience of working together. They're very tight-knit. They really are concerned about what is happening with the water. They take a lot of things and they really look in depth into them that we all take for granted on a normal day. With being so close to the Missouri River, all the water that comes through the reservation, we have no control over. We have no control over what is in it, who's contaminated it, what is going on with this. We work really hard to try to help protect it and keep it for future generations. That is a lot what we do daily. We work with the tribal government one-on-one. Until the last 3 to 4 years, we have finally opened up. They've allowed me to open up and reach out. So we work with a lot of really strong partners. We work a lot with DEQ. Laura, Sam, Carla, they're great. We work with them a lot. They come up, they helped us with recent well water sampling. I work with Annette a lot with the NRD. We have 4 NRDs that meet within the reservation, so we are very unique, so we get to spend a lot of time in meetings. DNR, NRCS, we spend a lot of time branching out and learning from each other. I guess the one thing that I have to say is, if you don't truly know or understand, ask. Don't assume, ask. There's really no wrong question or wrong answer unless, you need to know. If I need to know something to make my job go better or to help my employees, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So it does ruffle some feathers sometimes, asking questions. They do some points look at you like, you're probably there with the male counterparts in your office as their secretary. I am not. So it's been difficult. I mean, you truly, when you come into this form of work, I didn't know that I would be doing this 7 years later. But it's been very interesting. I'm very passionate about it because it is an area that is my home and definitely needs to stay protected. So we're going to continue working with everyone and all of our partners. And these kind of conversations, to learn from each other, and to hopefully figure things out moving forward. Thank you.
Like Crystal said, my name is Chelsea Johnson. I'm the Deputy Director at the Nebraska Conservation Voters. We do education, advocacy, and electoral work across the state. Our education work consists of, we actually have 18 community organizers that are serving in 25 communities. They put together monthly educational programs in each of their communities, and they're working to implement local conservation projects that are led by the community. So trying to learn, what does Crete, Nebraska, see as a good opportunity to improve conservation practices in their community, and how can we help make that happen? When it comes to our advocacy work, that involves, trying to get good policies passed that protect the environment. And when it comes to our political work, we try to get good people elected to office, particularly offices that deal directly with our natural resources. So we've been engaged in public power races, and NRDs are a good opportunity to get involved in as well. So the three main points that I wanted to make today are, one, women are truly leading efforts to protect our natural resources at the community level. In my experience so far, in all 25 communities that we're organizing in, women are more likely to volunteer. Women are more likely to be the ones organizing their peers to take action. Two, there aren't that many women in leadership roles. So when you look across at all 23 NRDs, there are not very many women who are on the elected boards of directors. Same goes for public power districts, and I think Rachel noted in her intro that there are only 2 out of 23 general managers of our NRDs who are women. So not a lot of women in leadership roles, but a lot of women working at the community level to make sure our natural resources are protected. And the third point I want to make is that there are steps that all of us in this room can take to improve that situation. So I already kind of talked about how at the community level, women are kind of the ground troops leading the way to make their communities better. But when it comes to elected office, there's not very many of us making the policy decisions. And Nebraska presents a unique opportunity for us to be in those policy making roles because we have these elected boards of directors of our NRDs. However, this isn't a problem that is unique to Nebraska. This is across the United States. The problem of women not being in elected office. So I'm curious if anybody here knows worldwide, where does the United States rank when it comes to women, percentage of women who are in parliament or state legislatures? So we ranked 79th as of January 1st, 2019. And that is below, quote unquote, developed countries, developing countries, etc. And part of that, some countries do have actual quotas for women to be in elected office, but that also includes countries that don't have quotas. So this is a kind of cultural problem in the United States. And there's been a lot of research done on this, and what it all finds is that it's because women aren't running for office. When women run, we win at the same rate as when men run. So the problem comes down to women not choosing to run for office. And there's a few trends or factors that research indicates is the reason for us not running for office. One is that we don't feel that we're qualified. And most of these surveys are looking at women and men who are at the similar stage in their professional careers. So they have similar professional accomplishments, but when you're looking at these people, women versus men are 35% more likely to think that they're qualified to run than women are. It also is because women aren't getting asked to run, not by their families or friends or by political parties or political activist nonprofits. So women aren't getting asked to run, and when they get asked to run, they often feel like they're not qualified to do the job. And then third is, we have 2 jobs already more often than men do, in terms of we have our professional jobs and then we also have our household jobs. And so that can be a deterrent for women deciding to take on a 3rd job of holding elected office. However, research indicates that that 3rd piece is not as powerful as the first 2 that I mentioned, which leads me to what we can do here in this room, which is asking each other to run for office, or asking, it doesn't have to be those of us in this room, but if you have a friend or a family member who's a woman who you think would be good to run for office, suggest that to her, because I think often we think, oh, it's the political parties that recruit people to run for office, but the research indicates that the actual institutions have the same amount of power as just family and friend relationships do when it comes to pushing women to run. So that's the first thing that we can do, is just encourage other women to run for office. The second thing is, if you have families, it does show that there's differences throughout a woman's life as to when she feels confident to run. And there's actually a really significant drop-off when they get to college, where even in high school, boys and girls are about equally likely to say that they're interested in running for office. But for some reason, when they get to college, it drops off significantly. So if you have any college-aged daughters, it's good to just keep encouraging them to run for office, because the research hasn't figured out why that drop-off happens, but that's a point that has been identified. And the other point I want to make is that this does extend to professional careers also. So this idea that we have that we're not qualified also extends to applying for promotions. So if you're not interested in running for office, but you are interested in being elevated in your careers, there's an interesting study that shows if there's a promotion available, a man looks at the qualifications list, he's likely to apply if he meets one of the criteria. If a woman looks at that same list, she thinks that she has to meet all of the requirements before she even applies. So this idea that we have to ask women to run for office, we also should ask women to seek out job promotions and apply for these opportunities, because she's also going to think she's not qualified enough to apply for those as well. So that wraps it up, and I'm going to pass it on to Karen Eamon, who is a wonderful role model.
What Chelsea didn't say is she is one of the few elected representatives in this room. Nancy Meyer, Chelsea, Deb Egan, and I all had to put ourselves out in front of the public and run for election. And you are very modest in not mentioning that you did it.
I did forget that, and I'll say the reason I did it is because Ann Bleed asked me to. So I would not have done it if somebody wouldn't have asked me to.
4 words. A need, a demand, no applicants. Why? Last night I was at one of our NRD committee meetings. Before the meeting, I had been visiting with one of my good friends on the board, Mike, and told him about this gathering today. And I said, what do you think? Why aren't there more women in leadership positions, and definitely not more women elected to leadership positions in water? And he said, I don't have an answer. And then halfway through the meeting, he scribbled something down on a sheet of paper, and I was trying to figure out some other issue, and Mike hands me this sheet of paper. A need, a demand, no applicants, why? And what his point was when we talked after the meeting, there is a need for more women on boards, and men know that. There's a demand for that. We want women on our boards, but nobody's applying. Why? And that follows up on what Chelsea just said. So I have been pondering that, and my answer is there are no easy answers. So let me back up a little bit and talk about what it's like to be elected to the job of setting policy and water management in Nebraska. Or at least one part of it. You guys get a lot of, well, you didn't go through the elective process, but you do those things. And before I come to Nebraska, I do have to acknowledge that we are part of the grand finale of Water for Food and for the conference that has just ended. And we can't forget the international perspective, because Water for Food is very much an international organization, and looking at water efficiency and water quantity and water quality throughout the globe. And one of the things that I remember as I think about that is 6 years ago when I attended the Stockholm International Water Institute conference, and there were 500 or 600 people from all over the world talking about water issues globally. And suddenly one man from England stood up and he said, well, what are we going to do about Nebraska? Their cattle have such a big water footprint. We got to do something about a state like that. Yeah, I haven't told you. Well, my husband was there with me. He's a hydrogeologist, and he has pretty much mapped the Ogallala Aquifer. So he decided to go talk to this man from England, and this man's impression was that the Ogallala Aquifer was being totally dried up, and the biggest problem was cattle all through the Great Plains states, but especially in Nebraska. So I have been thinking about the international perspective, and I have a little bit more to tell you from that perspective, but now I'm going to come back to Nebraska for just a minute and how I got here. Make it really fast, since we've talked about our undergraduate majors and how we ended up in water. I was an English major at Duke and took Geology 101 and my sophomore year, and went to my advisor and said, I'm changing, I want to major in geology. And he said, you can't, there aren't any women geology majors, what would they do with you on field trips? Sorry, you can't be. God, I didn't mean that the way it sounded. And he said, you just can't be one, and besides, you've got all these credits towards being an English major. So maybe there's some value to communication, to being an English major. Actually, there is a lot of value. But years later, fast forward, after having worked in New York City in international banking, I said, I've got to be a geologist. So I came here to Nebraska to enter graduate school in geology. But I also met a man that I fell in love with, and he was in the Air Force, and lo and behold, we got married and left before I had done much. 4 years later, I cannot be anything but a geologist, so I'm in grad school in Boulder in sedimentology, which is a great field to study if you want to understand water. And I had done all the coursework and had begun my field work in the Dawson Arcos on the Front Range of Colorado, and I got pregnant with my first child. And I said to myself, no problem, I'll just put this baby on a backpack and my rock hammer here and my sample bags over here, and I will just keep doing my field work for my thesis. Well, you can guess the rest of the story. I never finished my thesis. So maybe it's a good thing that I did not become a professional geologist, because that way I can bring a certain amount of scientific knowledge to the NRD board, but at the same time have a little bit broader perspective of society and communication and all those things that we've talked about. The marriage with the 2 children did not last, but the new marriage is 15 years old, and I have been taken all over the Sandhills, every place where the Ogallala Aquifer outcrops. And by the way, I would guess everybody in this room knows it, an aquifer is a rock formation. It is not a lake, it is not a river. An aquifer is a rock. And so the Ogallala Aquifer is an aquifer from, well, the easternmost outcrop is right around North Platte, and then it slopes underground. So it is an aquifer when it's underground. But it is not an aquifer close to Ogallala, Nebraska, which is where the type section got its name. So that's the teeny bit of geology for the day, but you do need to know geology to understand aquifers and groundwater. I'm going to come back to making policy decisions and tell you that you have to make 3 commitments once you've been elected. You have to commit to being well-informed, and that means knowing the science of every policy decision you need to make. You have to commit to knowing the people who will be impacted and knowing the processes that we go through with people, as Jennifer talked about, bringing people from the public together into helping to make these decisions. And then you have to commit to making tough decisions. I think every tough decision that we have made on the board involves helping somebody, but probably harming somebody else, whether it's a dry dam where a farming couple who are 4th generation on that land say, wait a minute, this is my family's land, but we end up having to build a dam to protect Waverly. I was so torn because the farming family would come talk to me at every meeting. Can't you do something? And what could I do? Yeah, that's a long case study that I won't go into. But you have to make a tough decision eventually. So after you've made the decision on a policy, then you are morally committed to following up and being sure that that policy decision was correct, that it really is being helpful to the most number of people possible. There's so much more I could say about being elected, and the other women in the room, 1, 2, 3, who are elected officials, will be probably talking more about it later this afternoon. But I want to come to the international perspective for a minute about women in water policy. In doing a little web search, I discovered something that we have not talked about, maybe we didn't know about, I didn't. Deloitte Touche, or now just known as Deloitte, sponsored a conference a little over a year ago, which was called Women and Urban Management Forum. And the subtitle was, What Can Be Done to Increase Women's Involvement in Water Policy and Management? And it was fascinating to read the article summarizing what happened at that conference. Is that my 5 minutes, 7 minutes? It may be. At any rate, here's the real quick international thing. A World Bank evaluation of 122 water projects around the world that found that those projects that included women were 6 to 7 times more effective than projects that did not include women. And yet, women make up less than 17% of people who officially work in the water field, and even a much smaller percentage of people who make water policy. So if that isn't enough to convince you to run for office, let me just bring up the example that motivates me. My daughter just had her 2nd baby a few months ago, and when I watch her nursing little Fia, I think that breast milk sure as heck better not be contaminated because some official didn't do their job keeping drinking water clean. So if you want to help your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors' children, the children running innocently around at recess in the schoolyard, the children who are getting graduate degrees in water science, run for office.
Let me introduce you. So I was very remiss that I did not see, even after chatting with you this morning, but Elisa Zanella, who is with us from our global conference. She's a farmer in Brazil, and I'll let you talk more about your family farm there. And wonderful to have you here. Thank you.
Crystal. I came from Brazil to talk to you, so I will do this. My name is Elisa. I'm from Brazil. I'm a farmer there. We have a family farm. My mother worked in the farm, my father, my brother, and my sister. She's graduating in agronomy, and we hope that she also come to work with us. I work with my family since 2009. I graduated in biology, and when I was in the college, I had a baby, and when I finished my college, my baby was 1 year, and my parents always told me that the woman has to work. So when I was pregnant, was very difficult to my mother, because she knows what a baby means to us, to the women. But she was the first to say me, you need to keep moving, keep studying, and I did this. It was, my baby was not a problem to me. It was the result. It was he solved many problems that I had. So it was very important to me. And when I finished my college, I started to work with my family in the farm. And as a biologist working in a farm, it was very important, the water for me. That's why I began to go to the meetings from the River Basin Committee in Brazil. It's similar with the NRDs here, but it's not so sophisticated. And so good in the governance like here. That's another point, that I'm here to know a little bit more about the NRDs and to return to Brazil and improve the water governance there. So in 2012, I started to participate in this river committee. In the beginning, the meetings were very, it's not so organized, and with me and another members of the board, like I become a member of the board in this river committee, and we tried to do a place better to discuss about water. So I'm trying to improve the governance with water there, and I know that to women like what's her name? Like Chelsea said, we have more than just the work to do. We have a family, we have kids, we have a house, but we have the power to face this. I had the pleasure yesterday and the day before to talk with some of you, and I know that you are all powerful women. You are very engaged in your jobs, and the women have a power that just the motherhood can explain. And that's why we are here, and we have to face the problems and always keep going. Thanks.
Thank you, that was amazing. So now let's ask them. I have a microphone here, so if you'd like to either raise your hand or maybe come out to the aisle for questions for these.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Esther from Nigeria. I'm happy that the African continent is being represented in this program. I commend all the panelists. And when they were discussing, I reflected on my job. I am an agricultural engineer. I did first degree, second degree in agricultural engineering, that's BSc and Masters. So at the end of my, along the line, I found myself in water resources, working with the federal government, Federal Ministry of Water Resources in Abuja, the capital city of Nigeria. And presently, I'm a deputy director, almost about reaching the director level now. I'm trusting God it will be possible. So a few comments I want to make. I've discovered that the task of women involvement in any discipline, including women, including water, with men, is really demanding. And especially when you want to combine it with coping with the family. So when I got my job with this ministry, and I'm now present in the policy making level, I made up my mind that I will not fail the woman. And what did I do? I decided to work hard. I decided to try as much as possible to promote the women cause. And I also decided to mentor the younger ones. And I also made up my mind that my family will not suffer for this profession I found myself. So what I did, I informed my husband and I told him, this is the type of work I am now doing. We need to cooperate. But typically in African continent, men are the head, and you have to make sure your own funds is taken care of. So I made up my mind. I told him, I said, I will be closing late, but by the grace of God, meals will be prepared and eaten as at when due. Nothing will be lacking. So I made sure I arranged some few things to surround that area because my job, is needed to be able to cope with the pressure of work. And I found myself among men. They feel jealous. A woman is acting. The top people minister is recognizing me. So I have to humble myself, also carry them along, so that they will not frustrate my effort. Then, for the younger ones, immediately, for some time they didn't employ any women engineers, generally engineers in the ministry, but 2, 3, 4 years ago, they recruited some women engineers. And I called them, are you ready to work in this department? If the answer is yes, please know that you are in for a tough time. Everything that you need to set up to cope with everything needed, timely delivery of your work, quality delivery of your work. Do you know when I did that? They supported it, and they were flowing into it. And to the extent that even my present director is using a woman as a PA. She's a civil engineer, and she's working hard. And then another typical sample, one of the ladies working in another department that was redundant moved to our department I can say less than 2 weeks ago. What I quickly did, she's junior to me, I told her, I said, you were closing 6 in your former department. Now for this department, we close around 9 p.m. and 10. So what I can do is to sensitize your husband. So one of the days the husband came, I now told him, I said, if you were seeing your wife earlier, but now the story has changed, please cooperate with us. He said, no problem. And she's quite working, everybody, likes her. Now, apart from mentorship, I decided that I must promote gender participation in irrigated agriculture for women and children. So one of the times when we had meeting with my minister, I told him, I said, I want to encourage women to participate in micro-irrigation. Allow us and let's do some pilots. By the grace of God, as I speak with you, just before I came, 2 pilot projects have been approved, and any time from now, we will commence. And I'm targeting the women, I'm targeting the youth. If they are able to demonstrate and learn capacity building, they will be able to also encourage other women, to put in. All we need now is funding to be able to also cover other areas to promote this project. So I'm here, if I have opportunity of funding partners who will be ready to collaborate with us, I want to run with that vision, and I want it to be established to be a model. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Any other questions, comments?
Hi, I am Donna Wittenberg. I know a few people in this room, and it's really nice to be here. I have a couple of comments because a lot of what Anna said really resonated with me. One of them was about our being mistaken as secretaries or wives. I've had that happen to me too. I've traveled with colleagues, male colleagues, and being the only woman in that group, I was mistaken as their secretary, and and I was one of the few PhDs in the whole group there, so that was a little scary. So I understand that exactly. Another thing about second shift, Chelsea was absolutely right. That is one thing that females have to deal with all the time. We do have 2 jobs. If we want to have a profession outside of the home, we also have our family that we're expected to take care of, or society expects that. Sometimes that's a fair assessment, but sometimes it's not. It is a very hard thing to do. I've had to miss meetings because of children, and I now also have some grandchildren that I'm taking care of. So I understand that completely, and we need to understand that for other females as well. Karen, you were talking about why there weren't as many women. There is a document that I want to share with, I guess, everybody in the room. I'll give it to Crystal, and she can post it. It's called Why So Few, about why so few females in science, technology, engineering, and math. It was put together, compiled, I think maybe 2012, but it's very relevant, by the American Association of University Women, AUW. It is online. I can give Crystal the link to it. And they detail a lot of reasons why there are so few women. Some of it has to do with, it's a collection of reports done on specific subjects, like stereotypes, beliefs about intelligence, our self-assessment, implicit bias, and a number of other things. So I think it would really be actually an enjoyable and maybe eye-opening read for everybody in the room. So those are some of my comments, and I'll turn it back over.
Good morning. My name is Renee Santosi. I'm a member of the Omaha Tribe of Nebraska, and I'm here this morning to participate. I'll be presenting sometime this morning. I just wanted to make some comments. Something that coming from the perspectives of, why there aren't women doing more of the leadership kind of work. And honestly, what I feel is that it's a matter of conditioning, because we've been conditioned so well. We've been conditioned so well to believe, in what our roles are supposed to be. And for this kind of thinking, it's a way of, that we have to, to quote Yoda, we have to unlearn what we've learned. And part of that is understanding, what has happened to us historically as women of the world. Now, I can speak from my own experience in understanding what such a role is, as a mother, as an educator, professional, etc., etc. And certainly the balance is, how do we do this and still remain professional? I mean, there are so many questions that we can, we can go off on all these tangents about the kind of research we can do about our roles as women in any field. So I think as we come back to where we're at presently, contemporary society says this, and this is what we're supposed to be doing. When actually we're encompassing everything else in addition to this, and this. And, I'm not here to bash men either, but I just wanted to share something my daughter said to me. And what she said was, Mom, well, you got teenage kids and, your children are into video games. I don't know who's not into video games these days. So I don't know what game they were playing, but my son is 20 years old and he's on the autism spectrum. But he asked his older sister, he said, I don't know, it was some kind of game where they were combating some kind of monster, in this whole fantasy situation. But he said, Colleen, why was it again that, we were supposed to protect the women? And so Colleen gave him a good answer. She said, well, Rain, it's because we as women, we're doing everything. We're taking care of the family. We're, managing everything that we're supposed to be doing to help our families. And the men are supposed to be protecting us. And then my other son chimed in, my younger son, and he said, we actually had it pretty easy, didn't we? And when she related that story to me, I just cracked up and I told, my son, I said, you're right. Your role was as a protector in our tribal society. And we women were the managers in charge of everything because we knew what we were doing. And it was a good story in that way because it hit me as to okay, this is contemporary society we're talking about. These are what my kids are seeing, but also it's letting us know that we really do know what we're doing. It's the current kind of system we're in now that doesn't recognize our own accomplishments. And if we remember that every day, well, heck, we're taking over the world. We're going to do it whether you like it or not. So, but our men, as we always talk about in tribal societies, our men still need their duties. And we have to help them and nurture them along with everything else we're doing, to bring them up to speed. They think they're in charge. But, it comes down to it, who's really doing all the real work. So to end that story, my daughter then told my son, Rain, if you notice that, in this game, the male, whatever he is, monster or whatever, he's protecting the female. But when you see that in nature, usually the female is more bigger and more ferocious than the male is, but she's doing a lot of the work. So, her occupation is over here, so he's supposed to be on guard, so she can carry out her work. I just thought that was a good analogy. I don't know why, but it seemed silly at the same time, but at the same time it was like, well, it is something that, is worthy of thought. That when we're carrying out our work as such, it's just what you had said, each one of you, I heard you. It's like But sometimes the belief is that we're the servants, we're the secretaries, we're the, something that we're not. I mean, and it's like, well, come on. It's time to change that paradigm, that thought process. Change it back to the way it was. So, thank you.
More comments?
Hi all, thank you so much for your comments. My name is Zoe Vallis. I'm one of the community organizers that Chelsea mentioned in her rundown. I have a question. Many of you touched upon this, not so directly, but indirectly as well. You all face conflict in your roles, whether it be from farmers talking about access to water, or something that we run across in the Upper Big Blue NRD is not wanting people to come and sample. So I'm just wondering how you each process through that conflict. What are some of the ways that you have implemented programs or brought along the community to help process through some of that conflict? And one of the things that Chelsea said that I resonated with was that projects including women were 6 to 7 times more likely to succeed. I do not come from a science background. I'm a community organizer. I studied women in international relations in college, and the same is to be said for peace processes after conflict. Once women are involved, or the theme of women and their work and labor that they do is involved, the processes are 2 to 3 times more likely to succeed. So just something to leave with this. Thanks.
I'll start really fast on the conflict part, and I want to point out that statistic was from the World Bank, looking internationally, not just a couple of countries, but internationally. For about 15 years, I was a neutral facilitator and did strategic planning with a whole group of clients all over the Midwest and West. So I never did express an opinion, and therefore I didn't have to have any conflicts. But on the board, and I'm going to let Chelsea take it next, on the board we are making policy decisions at the NRD and also at the Statewide Natural Resources Commission. We're all very polite because we're Nebraska nice, but we do disagree with each other. Sometimes I even feel a little heat coming up to my face thinking, how can that guy say that? But because we basically respect each other, we hash out decisions as best we can, either the whole big board at the NRD or in the subcommittees where we can be a little more candid. And then we take a vote, which is not something that I would recommend if you're a neutral facilitator to do a formal vote. But if you lose, if your viewpoint loses over a conflicted proposal, then you just have to take a deep breath, and if you care about it really passionately, you figure out another way to bring the issue up later. And if you don't feel passionately, you let it go and put your political power in the issues that you feel most passionate about.
The main instances on the NRD board that I can think of have all kind of gone back to policies that we have, and just either, so in your example of like a farmer not being happy with what the NRD is doing, just sticking to our policies that we have, but also being open to reevaluating those processes and policies and seeing if those need to be changed, because sometimes they're really outdated and there are new circumstances that need to be accounted for. So I've seen that on our NRD. I think when it comes to wanting to affect things that I've wanted to do on the NRD board that I've been unable to do either because I'm very young for the board or a woman on the board or just have ideas that other people don't necessarily, they're newer, right? So I kind of just put my organizing hat on and just meet with all the board members and talk about it and try to get something done.
I think the biggest thing for my department and my area is it's listening. You know, it's the communication aspect of talking to the individuals, the farmers, community members, anyone within the reservation boundaries is all we have jurisdiction over or we can help. My biggest thing is I'm not a regulator. I'm there to help. We are there to help protect the resources that we have to make them better and to sustain them. And so it's not pulling the, well, this is regulation, this is why we have to do it. It's pulling the, how can I help you? Let's find a way to make this work. And it's just, it's opening up and having that communication with them, because a lot of the issues that we see are farmers that have been doing this for generations, and they may have a different way of seeing things. My grandfather lives on the reservation and he's 88 years old and he still farms. He's passing that down now to the much younger generation, so it's a whole different aspect. It's going from someone who may be interested in doing cover crops, who in his generation was, we don't even sign our land over to anyone else because it's mine. If I die, I'm taking it with me. You know, it's that whole dealing with generations and bridging that gap and trying to make them understand we're not here to work against them, we're here to work with them.
Yeah, conflict's hard, you know, what do you do? A lot of times people who are upset about something just really need something to say their piece. They want to get their thoughts out there and they just have to, it spills out of them, you know, so you listen, like you said, Alisha. You just listen, and ask questions and try and get to be specific about what they're upset about or the conflict. And if it comes down to law or regulation, like we here at this end of the line here have to deal with, you kind of say, well, maybe you need to think about changing that, and here's how you go about changing it. You talk to your senator. If it gets to be that you can't resolve it, you know. And we are there to help too, but less so than you. Sometimes we have to draw the line and say, this is it. Thank you for giving us your opinion. We're certainly going to take that into consideration, but we have to, in the end, we have to follow this law, and you just do the best you can.
Yeah. I guess I would echo the thoughts that everyone else has already said, but something that we've been doing some training on in our office is motivational interviewing, which is something that's used in the health profession a lot to get folks to change health behaviors. You ask them questions back that get them to think about what their issue is in a different way. And so we use that technique a lot in dealing with conflict. And what is really great about the stakeholder process that we have is the people who are in conflict with one another are sitting at those tables, and our job is to facilitate that conversation about that conflict. And we just did a survey of the Upper Platte group of the folks who were stakeholders in that process. And one of the questions we asked them is, do you feel that you got out of this a better understanding of other people's perspectives? And that was one of the highest answered questions, that yes. All the folks who were sitting around that table, and Elisa may remember exactly the numbers, but I don't remember what they are, but it was a very positive response that everyone agreed that having that stakeholder process, that opportunity to talk to one another, really helped them appreciate the other's perspective. And we came out of that process with all but one a unanimous vote to move forward with the plan. And with a group of 30 people, I think that was pretty good on our part to get through that in a really tough condition.
In our river basin committee, there are people from different interests. There are user waters, there are people from the government, and people from the society. And in almost all the meetings, we have discussions about water. And I use it to say that what's the focus that we are there. Everybody wants the water management, and everybody wants the water stay in rivers and everybody uses, and the water be in and the water is still there. So I always say this: we want to have water. So what we need to do this? Like I just show the focus to the different people, and go ahead.
Let's thank everyone again for